Michael Collins is an enigma. Sometimes it's hard to see the wood for the trees. So I'm going to try and clear a path to freedom, if you will. Freedom from the lies and cliches that have been given to us down through the decades about Collins, one of the greatest Irishmen that ever lived. And maybe some answers as to why and how he was murdered. Michael Collins was born in 1890 in his homestead of Woodfield near Sam's Cross, near Clonakilty in County Cork. His father, Michael John, was 75 years old when Michael was born. So there's hope for all of us. Michael John had been born in 1815, the year of the Battle of Waterloo, and his grandfather had fought with the United Irishmen at the only 1798 engagement in Cork, the Battle of the Big Cross. So Michael Collins' Republican credentials are impeccable right back to 1798. This also means that Michael John, Collins' father, was in his 30s when the famine or hunger hit Ireland. This results in him becoming a Fenian. So there's no way Michael Collins is going to end up an Empire loyalist. Let's put it that way. The year of Collins' birth, 1890, saw one of the most seismic political scandals in Irish history. Charles Stewart Parnell was an organisational genius. He had taken all the disparate elements of Irish political life and put them into one party, the Irish Parliamentary Party. He introduced a whip system, so they all thought and voted as one. In this way, he was able to hold the balance of power with Gladstone and the Liberals and get the first Home Rule Bill into Parliament. It was defeated, only by about 25 votes. So Parnell, also a member of the IRB secretly, had figured out you could get Home Rule if you just convince 25 more British politicians to vote for it. Unfortunately, in 1890, a scandal broke. In the divorce proceedings of one Catherine O'Shea, later known in the tabloids as Kitty O'Shea, it had been found that Charles Stewart Parnell was living in sin for 10 years with a married woman and had 3 kids with her. She was separated, but in her divorce from Captain William O'Shea, Parnell was named as the co-respondent. In highly moralistic Victorian England and Ireland, this was unforgivable. The Irish Parliamentary Party split in two, the anti-Parnellite faction led by one Tim Healy, a man we'll be seeing more of later on. Parnell went out in all weathers all over Ireland to try and rebuild the organisation, but it was hopeless. He died within a year of pneumonia. Parnell's brilliant organisational achievements lay in tatters. And the British were now aware of one thing. It wouldn't matter what you achieved in the name of Ireland. You could be destroyed over issues of sexual morality. This chink in Parnell's armour was his downfall. Was this something Michael Collins' enemies could use against him? Michael's only 6 when his father dies, but on his deathbed his father says he may do great things for Ireland. In 1906, Collins moves to London and spends the next 10 years living with his older sister Hannie. The London years are absolutely vital in understanding Michael Collins, though as we've seen, sometimes he's treated as if he came down the Liffey in a bubble in 1916 and nothing ever happened before that. He worked in the post office initially, and in 1909 is sworn into the IRB by Protestant Republican Sam Maguire. Yes, that's Sam Maguire. Again, the IRB can trace its roots back to the Fenians, and this is also vital to the story of Michael Collins. No matter what political movements it allies itself with, the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, is dedicated to setting up an Irish Republic completely separate from the British Empire. From the moment Michael Collins joins the IRB, I believe he's involved in high-level intelligence work. Through the post office and later with the Guarantee Trust, which was J.P. Morgan, who financed World War I believe Collins is moving through institutions of the British Empire as a means of figuring a way to take it down. He's presented to us like a kind of a rough-hewn farm boy from West Cork, who through native guile and cunning confounds his enemies. But I would compare him much more to James Bond, and the work he will do in this capacity, long before 1916, is, I think, responsible for the British coming to the negotiating table in 1921. This show is about intelligence, the importance of intelligence, the failure of intelligence, and insults to your intelligence. And also keep the number 2 in mind throughout, because it's duplicity, it's Collins' use of duplicity that makes him so effective, but it's also what makes his existence so dangerous to so many people on both sides of the conflict. Before we can get to the truth about Michael Collins, we must first remind ourselves of the official story, the simple schoolbook version, the cliched winner's history version, the version we kind of saw in that movie, kind of a Pathé film reeling in the years version, but thankfully without the GA results of 1920.
Like all Fine Gaelers, Michael Collins is born a fully grown man at the age of 26. He takes part in the Sinn Féin rebellion of 1916. Oh no, they've blown up Cleary's. Where's Mrs. McGinty going to get her spuds now? The rebels are defeated. We have their flag. Silly blighters. Prison's good enough for you now, Sinn Féiners. Frongok prison. Shinna holiday camp more like. Anyone fancy a game of darts? 1917. We've let the blighters go. We should have shot them, knowing what happened next. 1918. Election time. Michael Collins says, vote Sinn Féin if you know it's good for you. They do, in resounding numbers. Sinn Féin sweep the board. But Michael Collins wants guns. He sells bonds to his own people. Here he is selling one to Erskine Childers. Now they can buy wooden shillelagh guns. Fat lot of use that'll be. The Cairo gang, sent in to eliminate Michael Collins. Why do they have numbers written above their heads? Oh, I see. That's not cricket, chaps.
Send in the RIC, the Black and Tans.
They burned down Cork City. Michael's not happy. The War of Independence goes up a gear. The burning of the customs house. Hey, that was my idea, says Devil Era. Yes, we know. We lost half our men in the operation. By the way, Michael, would you like to head up the treaty delegation? No, Dev, I think you're the best man for the job. No, after you, I insist. No, all right then, whatever you say, Chief. Number 10, where the peace was signed. The Anglo-Irish Treaty. The Irish delegation. This will change the relationship between Ireland and Great Britain forever. Oh no, Mick, you gave away the North. Splendid news, says the King. His smile reflects the Irish sunshine. The Brits are happy. Michael Collins less so. I've signed my death warrant, he says. Why wouldn't you swear an oath of allegiance to me? What? Michael Collins sells the treaty to his own people. They agree. Devil Era's not happy. He shouts at Michael Collins. So does Cathal Brugha. And again. And again. Did you know Cathal Brugha smiled one time? Even Dev had a chuckle once. But the women aren't happy. They don't like the treaty. What's wrong, ladies? Don't you like the way we painted the post boxes green? The anti-treaty side, they break away from the Dáil. The IRA roam the streets of Dublin. Michael Collins puts on his big boy pants and puts on his general's uniform. We've got to get those blighters out of the forecourts, he says. Not a chance. Well, if you won't come out, we'll have to blow you out. The forecourt's in flames. The Irish Civil War has begun. Cathal Brugha lays dead. Michael Collins doesn't want all his friends and brothers fighting. He takes the trip to Cork to try and make peace moves. Stops for a fag break at Béal na Bláth. This is where the trouble starts. A gunfight breaks out. Let's stay and fight them, boys. Suddenly, at the fatal moment, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers ruins another movie. Collins is shot among his friends. A devastating head wound that takes his life immediately. Well, except for the few last words he's able to utter. Forgive them, no reprisals, Bury me in Glasnevin with the boys. The funeral of Michael Collins. Many thousands attend. Michael Collins is replaced as head of the Irish Free State by Charlie Chaplin. The Brits are happy. Winston Churchill realises his nemesis is gone. Eamon de Valera has the last laugh. His party, Fianna Fáil, run Ireland for the next 700 years. Who shot him? Sonny O'Neill. The end.
The circumstances around Collins' life and death are as strange and slippery as he had to be when dealing with the biggest empire the world has ever known. And they would stop at nothing to stop him. And unfortunately, I have to start off with a little known fact. It comes from a book written in 1985 by a sports writer called Geoffrey Green, called Pardon Me for Living. It's a good book. If you're a sports fan, he'd quite an interesting life. But there's an extremely interesting passage in the middle of it. The time is 1938, and he's a freelancer for the Times newspaper. He does some work experience to find out how the paper works, and he gets to go in and meet the editorial board of the newspaper. He writes, "Everything and everyone worked with precision. There was some 10 fellows perched around a long table. One, a son of Collins, the Irish rebel martyr. Another, the son of a South African Prime Minister. A son of Collins, the Irish rebel martyr. This throwaway line caused a sensation back in 1985. And to find out what it's all about, we have to go right back to Collins' early years in London and the friends he cultivated there." When I say the friends that Michael Collins cultivated, I really mean the friends his sister Hannie Collins had. She was 11 years his senior, and she'd been living over in London for a good while. And she's who introduced Michael to all these interesting people. In fact, the more I think of it, maybe she was the James Bond of the story, and he was just along for the ride. One of the best books about Michael Collins, especially if you have a visual brain like me, is Chrissy Osborne's A Life in Pictures. She brilliantly gives us the places that Collins worked and socialised in London and gives us a real sense of his life there. Hannie, his sister, had been working as a clerk in the post office savings bank, and that's where Michael started work as a boy clerk. In 1910, a friend of Hannah's, Moya Llewellyn-Davies, became also friends with Michael. Her husband, Crompton Llewellyn-Davies, was very high up in the post office. He was best friends and election agent for one David Lloyd George. So 11 years before Michael Collins faces Lloyd George across the negotiating table in the Anglo-Irish Treaty, he's 2 heartbeats away from the future Prime Minister. In 1910, Lloyd George is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So you have a 20-year-old freshly sworn in IRB member effectively marking the money man of the British Empire. It's incredible. It may seem coincidental. I did a gig once in Trafalgar Square with my band where Boris Johnson was running the gig. He was the Mayor of London. So effectively I was, within an arse's roar of the future Prime Minister of Britain. But I wasn't marking him, in an effort to try and destabilise the United Kingdom. Sort of. But Michael's not the only one in this rectangle, as it were, that has IRB connections. Moya Llewellyn-Davies herself is Irish. Her real name is Moya O'Connor, and her father's name was James O'Connor, who was in the Supreme Council of the IRB, who was arrested for being a Fenian and was later an Irish Parliamentary Party member. Moya and her father are the only survivors of a tragic and strange event that took place in 1890, the year of Collins' birth. James's wife and 5 children, including Moya, ate mussels from a pond in Blackrock where they lived. Moya only had 2 mussels, was bowled and was sent off to bed. Her mother and the 4 children died of poisoning. The incident is even mentioned in James Joyce's Ulysses. James O'Connor is buried in Glasnevin, his name inscribed on the memorial to the mother and the 4 cherubs who died. James O'Connor remarries, but Moya heads off to London, and that's where she meets Crompton Llewellyn Davies, the Solicitor General of the Post Office, who is substantially older than her. Moya is 29 when she meets Michael Collins. He's 20. She's a nationalist. She meets up with him in the Gaelic League. They become firm friends. And she works for him and with him right up till his death. Rumours, letters and other evidence point to it being more than just a friendship. And this is one reason she seems to have been erased and removed as far as possible from Irish history. Moya and Crompton Llewellyn Davies have 2 children. Richard is born in 1912. And this Richard Llewellyn Davies, is the man whom Geoffrey Green is talking about when he mentions Collins' son in his book. So is Michael Collins the father of Richard Llewellyn Davies? In another show, I do have Wolfe Tone having a different father to Peter Tone, his father actually being Arthur Wolfe, Lord Kilwarden. But before you think I'm some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist, don't tell me it can't happen. Richard is certainly the image of his mother, but is there anything of Michael Collins in him? We know that Richard becomes very, very successful. He's an architect, and that's where Geoffrey Green meets him on the board of the Times. Richard Llewellyn Davies is a modern architect of note. He designs and builds the new offices for the Times in Printing House Square. He later goes on to have one of the most successful architectural practices in the world, including the design of the city of Milton Keynes. Not really my kind of stuff, but my friends in the Brutalism Appreciation Society would love it, and Jonathan Meads. Whether Richard Llewellyn Davies is Michael Collins' son or not, certainly it was openly discussed on the editorial board of the Times when Geoffrey Green arrived in there. 2 things are clear. Either he was quite open and boastful about the fact that Michael Collins was his father, or rumours had flown around because of his family connection and was a bit of gentle ribbing going on. Michael and Hanny Collins socialise quite a bit with Moya and Crompton Llewellyn Davies. They go to the theatre together. Later, in 1913, Michael is at a soiree and introduced to John and Hazel Lavery. John Lavery, the famous portrait painter from Belfast, and his younger American wife, the glamorous Hazel Lavery, who is also called upon by Lloyd George to put on parties to grease the wheels of diplomacy in whatever he's doing. 3 years before 1916, IRB agent Michael Collins has infiltrated high society in London better than James Bond ever could. And this is where the duality of Collins begins. He's hanging out at GAA clubs with his young male Irish friends, dating Irish girls, but he's also hanging out at these very high-level events with the Laverys, with James Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, who of course is connected with all the Llewellyn Davies children who inspired that book. And he's MI5. We are seeing a little bit more than just an expression of bohemian London, where the various stratas of society hang out together. Why is any of this relevant? I hear you roaring at me. Because 2 of the assassination attempts against Michael Collins in 1922 will take place in the company of Moya Llewellyn Davies and the Laverys. And the strange paths and connections that Michael makes in London will resurface again and again, right up till his death. As for Richard and the possibility of Michael having a son, why is that important? Is it possible that the British establishment think that they have won over Michael Collins the way they did over Parnell? While all these interesting connections are being made, Michael's working life is going from strength to strength. He leaves the Post Office Savings Bank in 1910 and goes to work for a stockbroking firm called Horn and Company. Yeah, I know. He then moves on to working for the Labour Exchange in Whitehall, and in 1915 goes to work for the Guarantee Trust Company, which is J.P. Morgan. We're in the middle of World War I now, and J.P. Morgan come up with the idea of Liberty bonds, bonds that people can buy to pay for World War I. Britain is incurring huge debt while the war is going on, and America are backing them up financially. This gives Michael some ideas. There's no doubt that with these really important jobs, Michael Collins had to have security clearance, and this has led to suspicions from certain quarters that he was in fact a British spy, but again, it's much more complex than that. Collins' genius and the reason that he succeeded where no one else did in relation to Irish freedom was that he knew that every Irish rebellion had been brought down by informers and the intelligence agencies the British had in Ireland. He knew that the only way to defeat them was to play them at their own game. And this is why I see the London years as vital. As in a John le Carré novel, was Michael Collins pretending to be an agent for the British? Was he indeed a double agent? Or that rarest of beasts, a triple agent? What is certain is that he had infiltrated to the very highest levels and was learning the ropes of how the British Empire ran financially and intelligence-wise. With World War I raging, conscription was going to be introduced. Collins had a choice: move with the Guarantee Trust Company JP Morgan over to America, or go home to Ireland, join the volunteers and take part in the Easter Rising. Had he gone to America, he might have lived a long and happy life like his brother Patrick. But he was a fighter, and the Ireland he would return to had undergone a cultural and literary revival, if it wasn't yet primed for revolution. It's 1915. Joyce moves to Zurich. Portrait is soon on the shelves. But his Christmas is ruined, because in Ireland it's God before everything else. Pierce in his cottage, writing the fools they have left us off Fenian dead. It's the road to the rising, but at this moment all that is just in his head. There's John Redmond by Parnell statue, taking salutes from the doomed. 25,000 march off to France, straight from their tenement rooms. It's the year of the 39 steps. There's 27 in Summerhill. And here in the rat pits, even the air can kill. Poor Lusitania, sunk by a German sub on the rocky road to Dublin. Yeats still won't go into a pub. Erskine and Molly not long ago sailed Asgard into the sun. Riddle me this, can you truly die for possessing an old friend's gun? Who is afraid of Virginia Woolf making her voyage out? Someone I fear, 'cause it's still 3 years until she can even vote. There's Roger Casement in Germany, trying to win some war. In a year all they'll care about is what he did behind closed doors. There's Joseph Plunkett, he'll give his captain the man who was Thursday soon. Hiding in plain sight, another leader lost in an empire's ruin. They were artists and writers, suffragettes, soldiers and activists. Do not forget this in the revisionist mist. To create is rebellion, so understand when I say what I mean.
What we write, what we fight today is the same as in 1915 on the road to the rising, road to the rising, road to the rising, road to the rising.
Michael Collins fought with the rank of Captain of the Volunteers in the 1916 Rising. He was stationed in the GPO under Joseph Plunkett, and his weapon of choice was his rifle that he trained with since 1914 with the Volunteers in London. The tactic of the 1916 Rising is well known. The Volunteers occupied various buildings around Dublin, were surrounded by superior British forces, which then rained down artillery and gunfire on them. Collins' sense of discipline and history came to the fore. He emptied out 2 barrels of porter, saying that they'd been accused of drinking in 1798 and we wouldn't be accused of the same thing. According to Tim Pat Coogan's brilliant Michael Collins biography, after a particularly furious fusillade, himself and Gerard O'Sullivan went up to Pearse and asked, "Would you mind if we popped out for a bit? We've a date with 2 girls and we don't want to disappoint them." After a week, the fighting was over. Collins was there for the retreat and the surrender. Talking later about the 1916 Rising, he said it had an air of Greek tragedy about it. He admired both Pearse and Connolly, but he felt Pearse was more of a dreamer. He wrote, "On the whole, I think the Rising was bungled terribly, costing many a good life. It seemed at first to be well organised, but then became subjected to panic decisions and a great lack of organisation and cooperation. These tactics would not be used in the War of Independence." Joseph Plunkett, Collins' superior, was set to be executed. He had given Collins a copy of his favourite book, The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. This book hugely influenced Collins' tactics in the War of Independence. Collins prized in particular the advice of the chief anarchist in the Chesterton book. If you don't seem to be hiding, nobody hunts you out. Accordingly, Collins never seemed to be hiding. Of course, the other thing about The Man Who Was Thursday is that there are 7 supposed anarchists, but 6 of them end up being spies who have infiltrated the anarchist organisation. So there's really only 1 anarchist and 6 spies trying to root him out. No wonder Collins liked it. If Collins was a double agent from all the work he'd done in London, of course he might have had the British convinced that he was working for them, and therefore that's why he wasn't picked up, which made him doubly dangerous. Collins and those who were imprisoned in Fronguk come back in 1917. Collins immediately starts organising the Volunteers and rises through the ranks extremely quickly. In 1918, the British want to introduce conscription. The anti-conscription movement is truly all-encompassing. The bishops are for it, the elites, the media. Why did the Catholic elites join the resistance movement? A bit like the housing crisis now. They only get annoyed about stuff when it starts affecting them. No harm, better late than never. 2 million people signed the anti-conscription pledge. Can you imagine getting 2 million Irish people to agree on anything now? Bar if like Garth Brooks booked 20 concerts in Croke Park. After this comes the German plot. Many Republicans are rounded up and put in prison. De Valera happy to do so because it will generate more sympathy from the people. Now, Collins is left in charge of things, and he makes Sinn Féin a far more Republican movement than it was before. Remember, when Sinn Féin was started off, Arthur Griffith wanted a dual monarchy. So rather than have no king, he wanted 2. I'm kind of going back to that idea myself. Have you ever seen an Irish presidential election? It's horrific. The 1918 election is seismic. It's the first time women over 30 are allowed to vote and men over 21, which means the electorate goes from 700,000 to 2 million. Sinn Féin win 73 out of 105 seats, with almost 500,000 votes. This works out at about 50% in the first past the post system. However, 25 of those TDs ran unopposed, so you can add another 200 to 300,000 votes. It's huge. The first Dáil is elected, including the first woman TD ever, Countess Markievicz, who's appointed Minister for Labour. Michael Collins is elected, and he's appointed Minister for Finance. Rather than wait around like John Redmond for Home Rule to be granted, the first Dáil decides to be an abstentionist parliament, to set up in the Mansion House and not to have anything to do with Westminster. The Irish Republic is declared. As Minister for Finance, Michael sets up the Dáil bonds in 1919, the idea he's taken from his work with JP Morgan, and raises £5.5 million to fund the War of Independence. He's also now Director of Intelligence and President of the Supreme Council of the IRB. According to the IRB, a secret organisation, whoever is President of the IRB is President of the Republic. So De Valera is President of the Dáil, but the de facto leader of Ireland is Michael Collins, according to the IRB. While De Valera heads off to America to raise funds and awareness of the Irish struggle and to try and get the Irish Republic recognised, Collins runs the show. Space won't allow me to go into Michael Collins' extraordinary War of Independence. I'm here to deal with his death, but a few things are important to note. His liquidation of the Cairo gang is well known and shows his extraordinary ability to play the British at their own game. Their replacements, the IGO gang, were a different matter. And in 1920, Michael Collins employed the services of one Dennis Sonny O'Neill as an intelligence officer. O'Neill had been in the RIC and then in the British Army during World War I, which made him invaluable. He was a member of RIC and British Army clubs in Dublin and Cork. Collins got him to collect information in both locations to try and root out the IGO gang. Note here that Sonny O'Neill was not employed as a marksman, just as an intelligence officer. In December 1920, the utterly undemocratic Government of Ireland Act partitioned Ireland. Elections were held in May of 1921, and here I think Sinn Féin made a massive strategic mistake. They ran 124 candidates who then became the Parliament of Southern Ireland. In my opinion, they'd walked into a British trap. Though they ran candidates north and south, by engaging with partitionist elections, I feel it compromised them when it came to negotiating on partition 6 months later at the Anglo-Irish Treaty talks. However, Sinn Féin was now all-powerful, and as well as Countess Markievicz, there was now 6 female TDs. The truce of July 1921 led to talks between De Valera and Lloyd George, at which De Valera must have known the parameters and the limits to what they could expect from any kind of treaty. Partition was already a fact on the ground. Very hard to negotiate on that. But most surprising was when it came to the actual treaty talks, Dev didn't go himself and sent Michael Collins. But remember again, Michael Collins, as president of the IRB, is the actual president of the Republic. And so, he really should be there. The amazing book Survivors by Unchin McKeown is one of those rare books out of print that actually gives us huge insight to what goes on at the treaty. It also goes into what's known as the mystery man of the treaty, John Charters, and places him in the same milieu as all the people that Michael Collins was dealing with in the early 1910s. In Survivors, Sean McBride and Moira Comerford both believe that John Charters is a plant. He's recently worked in the Ministry for Munitions, which was run by Lloyd George, and has had a sudden conversion to the cause of Irish freedom. That's not unique. There's a lot of people who did that. Tom Barry, for instance, was in the British Army and came back and immediately joined the IRA. Another person who was in the British Army, a decorated war hero, was Emmett Dalton, who became Collins' right-hand man throughout the treaty negotiations. Sometimes Dalton is referred to as one of Collins' bodyguards. This isn't the case. He was liaising with Macready and Andy Cope of Dublin Castle in terms of defence and army arrangements to do with the new Free State. This is a hugely important role when we realise what Michael Collins signs the treaty for. He may not be happy with partition, or the Oath of Allegiance, or the treaty ports, or the land annuities of 5 million that have to be paid to the British government. Now that I've listed them, aren't they awful? But what he is looking for is a national army. And almost as soon as the treaty is signed, we find out why that is. Article 8 of the treaty says, if the Irish Free State establishes a military defence force, the numbers of that force are not to exceed an agreed fraction of the British military defence force. Actually, when it comes to the size of the British Army, how long is a piece of string? This is something Collins can work with. Plenty of people re-enter Collins' life from his earlier years. The Laverys are about during the treaty negotiations. He's over at their house every second night. Moya Llewellyn-Davies and her husband Crompton Llewellyn-Davies are present for part of it. Supposedly, Crompton drafts some of the treaty. One rumour that has surfaced is that Collins is dead set against signing the treaty the night before it's signed. Supposedly Lady Lavery and Moya Llewellyn-Davies visit him and take him away in a car. After he comes back, he signs resignedly. It's been mooted this is because he's introduced to young Richard Llewellyn-Davies, and this is being used by the British to blackmail him into signing. During the truce, Collins' identity has been revealed. He's become a very popular public figure. He's in all the papers, and his relationship with Kitty Kiernan from Granard is all over the place. Presumably, the British think they have him over a barrel with the Richard Llewellyn-Davies rumour. Or did Collins have something on Lloyd George? In Dan Snow's recent brilliant documentary about his great-great-grandfather, Lloyd George, it's revealed that Lloyd George had a 30-year affair with his secretary. From all the marking Michael Collins had been doing since 1909, did he have this little factoid up his sleeve? If so, is this why Collins didn't worry about the Llewellyn-Davies story coming out? Was it a case of mutually assured destruction? Regardless of the potential for scandal, actual destruction is threatened when Lloyd George says there will be immediate and terrible war if they don't sign the treaty. I believe Collins signs the treaty. Reluctantly, all right, but he's got what he wants, a national army. He's already formulating his version of freedom to achieve freedom. Collins remarks to the British that he signed his actual death warrant. But is this for show? The Dáil vote on the treaty was a close run thing, 64 to 57. Collins took charge of Dublin Castle, while Dalton began to build up the National Army. Collins appointed Thomas Markham to go through all the records the British haven't destroyed. After his death, an entry is found in Collins' diary, Markham Thorpe Healy. Thorpe refers to a long-standing British spy who operated in the 1880s and 1890s in Ireland. Healy refers to Tim Healy, the man who split the Parnellite movement. Healy was around for the treaty negotiations, has a direct line on friendship with Lloyd George. Later on, Tim Pat Coogan will say he's found a different identity for Thorpe, a father and son team. Whether Healy is the informant Thorpe or not, it shows one thing. Collins is busy rooting out British spies in the newly forming state as much as he was under the British. The revolution isn't quite over for Michael Collins. It isn't over for the women of Ireland either. When Cumann na Món go to vote on the treaty, the results are resoundingly against. 419 votes to 63. Why is this? Because like their counterparts in the IRA, Cumann na Món feel like the job hasn't been done, and the treaty is a complete sellout of their principles. Does women's far more Republican stance on the treaty reflect the wider public's feelings on it too. Most people know about the January 1922 treaty debates, where the anti-treaty side under De Valera and Cathal Brugha walk out. But a lot fewer people know that they walk back in again. And debate continued right up till April 28th. All 6 women TDs were anti-treaty. And on the 2nd of March 1922, Kate O'Callaghan of Limerick proposed that the women's franchise, the vote for women, should be extended to women over 21, not over 30, as it was in the previous election. This should have been a no-brainer. The pre-state constitution that Michael Collins was working on allowed for men and women over 21 to be able to vote. So why was extending the franchise for women under 30 even under debate? Collins and Griffith knew that if women under 30 were allowed vote, it may very well reflect the Cumann na mBan attitude and tip the balance. In 1920, Kate O'Callaghan had witnessed her husband being shot in front of her by the RIC. The debates between the pro and anti-treaty side are pretty vicious. The women were dubbed the Black Widows, written up by the media as fanatics. Arthur Griffith fought it pretty bitterly on March the 2nd. He accused Kate O'Callaghan's proposal of votes for women over 21 as her trying to torpedo the treaty. By his own admission, he must have thought the vote would be a lot closer than it turned out. The excuse given by the pro-treaty side was that with 3 months to go, there wouldn't be enough time to update the voting rolls. I think this is rubbish. It was going to be a very complicated election anyway, being the first one under the PR or proportional representation system, the one we still use. You know, the one where you don't have to really make up your mind. You can vote 15 times and give your number 11 to the fella who was nice to you one time and patted the dog. Collins didn't really get involved. He just said a few times, it'd be impossible. But Collins knew the game. He wanted the treaty to be ratified overwhelmingly by the Irish public, so there was no way they were going to allow women in their 20s to vote on it. The average age of men and women who fought in the War of Independence was 23, so they were obviously going to have strong opinions on the matter. As it happened, the March 2nd Irish Women in the Franchise vote was defeated, 47 votes to 38. 9 votes was all it took to stop 350,000 Irish women from having a say on the treaty. Collins and Griffith had got a reprieve, but Irish women weren't happy. While Collins and his committee were busy drafting the new Free State Constitution in the Shelburne Hotel, he was staying in the Gresham Hotel. From Anne Matthews' Renegades, rumour and gossip were rife about all aspects of the treaty, and rumour of a personal nature was circulated about Michael Collins. Kathleen Clark informed Jenny Wisepower that an anonymous letter was in circulation in Dublin to the effect that there was another Kitty O'Shea in the Gresham, referring to Charles Stewart Parnell's notorious affair which destroyed his political career, and said lady, it stated, was sapping the manhood of Collins. The woman was Moya Llewellyn-Davies, who had booked into the Gresham Hotel where Collins was based. Wisepower told Collins about the letter and he spoke to Davies, who moved away immediately. Collins then refused to entertain any correspondence from her except through his friend and colleague Bláth O'Connor. According to Wisepower, Llewellyn-Davies was subsequently shunned by Collins' friends and colleagues. That may be true, but he was back hanging out with Moya mid to late August before he went to Cork. One of the annoying things about Neil Jordan's Michael Collins film isn't just the amount of historical inaccuracy in it, but it's the unnecessary historical inaccuracy. One scene in particular drives me mad. It says, 7th of June 1922, the treaty is carried by popular vote. De Valera and his supporters refuse to accept it. And down in the corner, it says massive vote in favour of treaty. First, let's deal with the date. The date was not the 7th of June 1922, but the 16th of June 1922. And a simple way, students, for you to remember that is that the 16th of June is Bloom's Day in the novel Ulysses, which was published in 1922. So that's how you can remember the date of the 1922 election. 16th of June 1922, not the 7th. A writer like Neil Jordan should know this. Then again, it could be deliberate. By making other things untrue in the film, he might as well get all the dates wrong too. That way, he can't be accused of getting some stuff right. But it's also a massive vote in favour of the treaty, which annoys me and many others. First of all, it wasn't an election on the treaty. In fact, it was a pact election. Both De Valera and Collins had made a pact to return as many Sinn Féin TDs as possible, either anti-treaty or pro-treaty, and they would form a coalition. It was also a vote on the new Free State Constitution that Collins had been working on, which unfortunately was only released the day of the election. Many people think this was a sleight of hand by Collins, a bit like not allowing the vote for women over 21. But to be fair to Collins, he'd been trying to make the Free State Constitution much more Republican than the actual treaty would allow. And Lloyd George and Winston Churchill kept torturing him and making him fly back to London and alter the bits they didn't like. The Constitution was only ready, really, on the day of the election. One sneaky thing Collins did do, though, was in a speech in Cork on the 14th of June, 2 days before the election, he got rid of the pact and just told people, vote whatever way you like. Again, this is Collins playing with democracy, using it to his own end. He just wants to give himself as powerful a pro-treaty government as possible. It's also unfair to say it's a treaty election because loads of other parties were running. It was the first proportional representation election in Irish history. So Labour got a huge vote. Even though they said they were pro-treaty, motivations of people to vote for them may not have been on the treaty idea, but on their social situation. The Farmers' Party also ran. The Businessmen Party ran, whatever that is. And the most annoying party that's ever existed in Irish politics, independents. When you look at the figures, it seems like the anti-treaty side have only got 22%. And so in the Neil Jordan film, it makes sense for him to say massive vote in favour of the treaty. But remember, we're missing two vital components to the electorate. 350,000 women under the age of 30 and Northern nationalists in the 6 counties who didn't get to vote in this election. Though the anti-treaty vote in the election is about 135,000. If you add the 125,000 nationalist votes in the north, and let's say 60% of all women under 30 to the anti-treaty side, you're getting closer to 500,000 anti-treaty votes on the island. That's assuming Northern nationalists would have voted against partition. They would have. With the other votes, it's a little bit more 50-50, which actually reflects the original Dáil vote. The pro-treatyites might have swung it anyway. They probably would have. But it's not really accurate to call it a landslide. People will say, yeah, but the vote was taken in the 26 counties and those are the numbers. You know, the 6 counties was separate. No one ever voted on partition. There was never actually a vote taken on that. Sure, I could draw a border around anything. I could draw a border around South County Dublin, round Wicklow down to Greystones, and we could take a vote, and the next morning Elizabeth II would be the head of state. I could draw a blob in the Midlands from like North Louth, Tyrone, down to Sligo, down to Portumna and back up again, and Big Tom would be the King of Ireland if you ask them. We can all make fake borders and make fake minorities majorities all we want, but it's ridiculous, and stop pretending it's normal. Partition is stupid. Collins thought partition was stupid too, but we'll get to that in a minute. It's very important. Collins' trickery had worked, but it had built up a lot of resentment against him and the pro-treaty side. Because it was a pure election, the final results weren't known for 9 days until the 24th of June. Personally, I think that's what started the Civil War. The bishops, the media and the elites were delighted with the result. A partitioned Ireland that accepted the treaty was the apotheosis of O'Connellism. An almost totally Catholic state without those pesky million Protestants to corrupt us all. And Collins was acting like a safe pair of hands, though he undeniably had huge power. He was chairman of the Provisional Government, which was to turn into the Free State Government on the 6th of December 1922. He was also Minister for Finance, so held the purse strings of the new state. And he was leader of the new National Army, which only numbered 4,000, but was getting the best of equipment sent over by Churchill. Armoured cars, tanks and guns. Actually, they didn't give us any tanks. Oh, they thought we were saying tanks. So it's like, what would you like? And we go, armoured cars, tanks and guns. And they misheard it. Jeez, if they got tanks, Civil War would have been over in weeks. Collins would have been in a tank at Béal na Bláth and not an open-top, bright yellow touring car. The middle classes and bourgeoisie of Ireland had had their say, and Collins' cabinet reflected this vote. They were what you could call safe pairs of hands. But was Collins?
What is it about leaders in this country? Why do they wind up useless or just dead? We've had 5,000 years of those obsessed with their careers, instead of how the Irish should be led. Queen Maeve and all the kings were greedy hoarders, while Crew Cullen and the boys, they fought and bled. The only one with fight who wanted Ireland to unite ended up with an axe stuck in his head. That's Brian Boru to you. In Ireland now the story is no different. The absolutely worst rise to the top. And because they're surrounded by the worst themselves, no one even feels like shouting, "Stop!" What is it that defines these awful people who somehow gain the right to lead this land? The good ones die too young, while the bad ones die in bed. And when they die in bed, what is the thing that's often said? He was a safe pair of hands. He's a safe pair of hands. Safe pair of hands. He really has no talent. All his life he's been quite bland. He's a safe pair of hands. He's a safe pair of hands. A safe pair of hands. He'll never be fired or even get a reprimand, 'cause he's a safe pair of hands. He's a safe pair of hands. Safe pair of hands. Always told since time eternal, it'll do, sure lads, it's grand. He's a safe pair of hands. He's a safe pair of hands. Safe pair of hands. You can trust he'll steer the ship of state straight into the sand. He's a safe pair of hands. He's a safe pair of hands. Safe pair of hands. He'd sell a natural resource for a measly 50 grand. He's never suffered hardship or the cold assassin's hand. I know lots of guys like that in big successful bands. We elevate the mediocre. They couldn't even win at poker. See what I did there? We're the safe pair of
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. No, please. Thank you so much.
At the end of Neil Jordan's Michael Collins movie, we see the scene of Collins' funeral with the words, "He died paradoxically in an attempt to finally remove the gun from Irish politics." So 90s. This scene obviously relates to the peace process that's going on in the 1990s. Unfortunately, applied to Michael Collins, it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, if we were to make a movie about Michael Collins' first 6 months in 1922, it would be "More guns, get me more guns, please." This attempt to sanitize Michael Collins isn't unique. In fact, it happened from the day after he died and has continued throughout the last 100 years. Collins, the resolute Democrat facing off the fanatical militants of the anti-treaty side, has been a trope in Irish life. for as long as I can remember. It's up there with the luckiest ricochet in history and the True Love Waits, Mills and Boone, Kitty Kiernan story. I don't mean to offend anybody who loves that story. It's just not true.
Or, as with everything to do with Michael Collins, it's half true.
Collins was a militant when he signed the treaty and remained a militant till the day he died. Democracy had its uses, sure, and he used it and discarded it in the last 8 months of his life as he saw fit. Remember I told you to keep the number 2 in mind? Well, from here on in, the split is the first item on the agenda. There's 2 IRAs, there's 2 IRBs, there's 2 governments, and there's 2 Michael Collins. In January 1922, the IRA splits over the treaty. People like Liam Mellows and Rory O'Connor go anti-treaty. Most of the leadership go pro-treaty, but the bulk of the Irish Republican Army, 80% or so, is anti-treaty. Most of the Supreme Council of the IRB go with Collins and vote for the treaty, 11-4. But because the IRB is so secret to this day, I can only get a few of the names. Michael Collins, Richard Mulcahy, Owen O'Duffy, etc. And then you would get down to some guy called Steve, and there's 2 we don't even know about. But we know who's anti-treaty. Liam Lynch, Harry Boland, Joe McKelvey and Charlie Daly. And this is the split in the IRB. But this isn't where the Civil War starts. Collins is determined to work together with his anti-treaty brothers. And in February, various meetings and initiatives take place emanating from the IRA's Ulster Council, set up in late January. Michael Collins instructs Owen O'Duffy, Chief of Staff of the pro-treaty IRA, to discreetly begin organising an offensive on Northern Ireland using the border counties as a base. Meetings are held with Liam Lynch, Collins and their staff in attendance. It is agreed that both pro and anti-treaty sides will select officers for the offensive against Northern Ireland, and they now proceed to counties Donegal, Louth, Monaghan and Cavan. Collins is insistent that, when the shooting starts, it must be said that it is the anti-treaty side that is doing it. So here, Collins wants to start a covert war in the 6 counties with the anti-treaty IRA in agreement. The public Collins is the one we all know, the lovely guy running the constitutional provisional government on its way to being a free state. But as an IRA man and a soldier, he wants to continue the war in the north. But how's he going to do it without getting caught? Another element is an exchange of arms. Weapons which the pro-treaty side recently received from the British will be sent to the anti-treaty Cork brigades, who in turn will send weapons north. This means the British can't trace the weapons they've given Collins to the IRA in the north. So there's total cooperation going on between the anti-treaty and pro-treaty sides. In a related episode, over 400 rifles are sent to Joe Sweeney, OC of the pro-treaty forces in Donegal, and he has handed them over to Johnny Haughey and Dan McKenna of the Derry Brigade, who take them over the border.
And yes, you guessed it, that Johnny Haughey was Charles J. Haughey's father. In fact, this will annoy you, but Collins and Haughey are quite similar figures. Both helped the people of the north when they were in crisis, though I'm not sure President Collins, had he lived, would ever have achieved this level of grandeur.
At this time, February 1922, the B Specials, the armed police of the north, are roaming freely into the south. In Clonus, a gunfight breaks out, and there are casualties on both sides. The north is highly militarised. The amount of British troops and B Specials, all armed, numbers 50,000. All of them organised by former Field Marshal Henry Wilson, a strongly unionist MP who is now advising James Craig in military matters in the 6 counties. After the Clonus affray, he calls for the British government to reconquer the south. And they can. They have 50,000 fully armed men. But why is Michael Collins running this covert war in the north? He signed the treaty, he accepted partition, he's shoving the terms of the treaty down the people of the south's throats. So why get involved in the affairs of Northern Ireland? Ah, Mick, you gave away the north. Sorry, couldn't resist. Before partition's a reality, everyone assumes that it's going to be a 9-county state, Ulster. Postcards and cartoons even attest to this fact. But it's actually Ulster Unionists like James Craig who insist on it being 6 counties. Why? Because they want a Protestant state for a Protestant people. 9 counties would be about 55% Protestant to 45% Catholic. 6 counties is more like 66% Protestant, 33% Catholic. In doing this, he abandons about 70,000 Protestants in Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan to a fate worse than death, having to live in Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. I'm only joking about Donegal. Michael Collins gets involved in the North because he's a Republican. He's not one of those Southerners that thinks that Donegal is a peninsula, nor is he one of those Cork people that thinks that Northern Ireland starts in Southern Tipperary. I'm sorry, Cork people, but there are other places in the world. I know it's hard, but they exist. One of the terms of the treaty is a boundary commission, which is supposed to meet to decide little chunks of border areas that might be Catholic that will be given to the south, or little chunks of the south that are Protestant to be given to the north. A pretty horrendous 1920s kind of idea. So surely Collins should be happy with that. But other factors have come into play. Since 1920, there's been 2 states, but there's also been 2 wars, and horrendous sectarian violence has broken out. In the period July 1920 to June 1922, 455 people were killed in Belfast alone, of whom 267 were Catholics. 8,750 Catholics have been expelled from their jobs, 23,000 Catholics driven from their homes, 500 interned, and up to 50,000 refugees are believed to have left the 6 counties and come south during this period. Collins isn't going to stand idly by, and that's why himself and his old army comrades are planning a northern offensive. In March, an entire Catholic family, the McMahons, are killed in reprisal for the death of Ulster police. Collins signs pacts with Craig to try and stop the violence, but nothing stops it. Meanwhile, the IRA want to hold an army convention on March 26th, and during it, Collins reveals his plans at an encounter on Harcourt Street. In Ernie O'Malley's The Men Will Talk to Me, a Connemara IRA man describes a conversation he has with Michael Collins. And he told me why we should accept the treaty, for we were out of ammunition, and the only choice we had was to accept the treaty. All he wanted himself, Collins said, was to accept the treaty for 6 months, get in arms, and then we could tell the British to go to blazes. We couldn't carry on the fight, for we'd no hope of carrying it on successfully. Collins' game plan: get in arms, build up the army, take on the North. In April, Rory O'Connor and the anti-treaty IRA take up headquarters in the Four Courts. This act is condemned by the British, but actually, the Four Courts becomes the nerve centre for the weaponry to be sent up to the north. It's the epicentre of the kind of Ho Chi Minh Trail that Collins has set up. At a meeting of his military council, Collins says we must make the north ungovernable. This goes against every fibre of Collins' cabinet's being. These are men on the make who want to run the 26-county state without any trouble from the north. You know the type. The Dáil last meets on April 28th, and it won't meet again till September. During this period, the British Army have mostly left Ireland, but there are still 5,000 British troops stationed in the Phoenix Park under General Macready. If anything goes wrong with the treaty, or Collins steps out of line, this is the force that will take Dublin. In May, the Northern Offensive begins. Between Bláth and Pettigo, a 2-week battle breaks out. Churchill stops the withdrawal of troops and condemns it utterly. All the while, Collins and Churchill are in discussions about the new Free State Constitution. Churchill is talking about these confidential discussions with his pen pal, Hazel Lavery.
My dear Hazel, I had a very pleasant talk with Michael Collins this morning, and I hope to see him again on Monday. I am very glad he and his colleagues are dining with you tonight. I am sure your influence will be exerted in the cause of peace. I ought, I think, to let you know confidentially that my colleagues take a most grave view of the Constitution.
Churchill hated Collins' constitution and even said it had a Bolshevik character. You heard it first. Collins was a Bolshevik. The Bláth-Pettigo affair ended with a British victory, and Henry Wilson was getting more and more militant in his public pronouncements. Meanwhile, the anti-treaty IRA in the Four Courts are having their own troubles. There's a split in the IRA between those who want to take on the British immediately and those who want to wait, like Collins, until they are fully ready. Florrie O'Donoghue and Tom Hales resign, for instance, from the executive, their place taken by Tom Barry, who wants to go straight to the Phoenix Park and wipe out Macready and the 5,000 British troops up there. The anti-treaty IRA splits between the hold on a minute, let's bide our time faction under Liam Lynch, and they move to the Clarence Hotel, and the let's do it now and take on the British in the Phoenix Park and the North immediately in the forecourts under Joe McKelvey. It's very complicated, I know. This is me making it easy for you. Just 6 days later, Henry Wilson, military advisor to the North, is shot dead in London by IRA men Reggie Dunn and Joseph O'Sullivan. Lloyd George immediately fires off a letter to Collins.
Dear Mr. Collins, I am desired by His Majesty's Government to inform you that documents have been found upon the murderers of Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, which clearly connect the assassins with the Irish Republican Army, and which further reveal the existence of a definite conspiracy against the peace and order of this country. Other information has reached His Majesty's Government showing that active preparations are on foot among the irregular elements of the IRA to resume attacks upon the lives and property of British subjects both in England and in Ulster. The ambiguous position of the Irish Republican Army can no longer be ignored by the British government.
This was a complete lie. No evidence was found on Reggie Dunn or Joseph O'Sullivan implicating the forecourts. In fact, they were acting on the orders of Michael Collins. Many historians have argued for years that this was an old order from 1921 that these fellas went and carried out. That's not how it works, lads. There was a truce and a treaty since then. Old orders don't hang about. This was obviously part of the Northern campaign. Collins is obviously saying, I've won the election, I've delivered your treaty, so stop the sectarian violence in the North. I can still reach one of your top dogs anytime I like. While Collins' cabinet are all publicly condemning the two lads for shooting Henry Wilson, the most paramount thing on Collins' mind is, how do I break them out of prison and get them back here? Churchill's claim that we were caught with papers linking us to Rory's garrison was a downright lie. There was no documents on us. The condemnation of the killing and the strong language from Mick's spokesman was bloody hypocritical. The detective gleefully reading out Churchill's ultimatum to Mick that if he didn't deal with Rory's defiance of the treaty, the British Army would. That put me on good form as I thought, yes, our plan is falling into place. Here we see Collins and the anti-treaty side's ambitions colliding. Reggie's hoping the war with the British will kick off again. What he doesn't know is Collins wants the same thing, just not yet. They're not ready. Lloyd George's letter was a complete lie. But what he was letting Collins know was, we know what you've been up to. We know your plans. Stop it now, or else it's back to war. Get Rory O'Connor, etc. out of the forecourts immediately. Collins delays. Churchill orders Macready up in the Phoenix Park to take the forecourts on the 24th of June. Macready refuses. He knows if he tries to take the forecourts, it will reunite the pro and anti-treaty IRA and the war with Britain will resume. Collins knows this too. If the war resumes, in June of 1922 the National Army is about 4,000, the IRA numbers about 13,000 fighting men. The British have 55,000 men on the island. Collins, a numbers man, knows it's not going to work. We're all told the Civil War starts because a bunch of anti-treaty IRA men seize some vans from up in Baggot Street and are arrested by national troops, and then Ginger O'Connell is taken hostage and the Civil War breaks out because of that. But it's not quite accurate. Collins knows why the Joe McKelvey, Rory O'Connor, Liam Mellows faction are robbing those vans in Baggot Street, because they're planning to send a massive contingent up north for a new northern offensive. If he doesn't stop them doing that, Macready's 5,000 British troops in the Phoenix Park will, or the 50,000 in the north. Collins also knows about the split in the anti-treaty ranks between Liam Lynch and Joe McKelvey. He thinks the Liam Lynch faction are on side with him, and that if he just takes out the Forecourts faction, he's stopping complete disaster and a resumption of hostilities with the British. His intelligence is faulty. Liam Lynch and Joe McKelvey have patched things up, and the entire anti-treaty IRA are on side for this northern excursion. Collins' initial plan had been to not allow food delivered and cut off the water, and eventually the anti-treatyites would leave the forecourts. But Macready in the Phoenix Park insists on more, or he'll have to move. Collins is really in a tight spot here. The scene is painted brilliantly in Leo Mellows and the Irish Revolution. The British authorities ultimately agreed to lend 2 pieces of artillery. Armed with this information, Griffith, Mulcahy and O'Duffy counted on battering down Collins' objections. The others present, O'Sullivan, Tobin, Emmett Dalton, McManus, Ennis and McMahon, said little. They knew the cause and recognised the occasion. That evening, a Free State officer performed a macabre little ceremony at Beggar's Bush. He constructed a wreath of flowers with which in mock solemnity he paraded the barrack square. Asked to explain this act of invultuation, he replied that he was performing the funeral rites of the Republic. The decision had been taken. What was left of the Republic was to be destroyed by force. Counter-revolution was now to order an Easter week in reverse. Emmett Dalton collects the 18-pounders and on the 28th of June 1922 begins bombarding the forecourts. The Battle of Dublin lasts for a week, in which 81 people die. It's about 18% of the casualties of Easter week, and is tactically as tragic and futile as that. If the anti-treaty split was real, Collins could be happy he'd snuffed out the diehards. But he hadn't, and one of the most remarkable intelligence failures in Irish history takes place at the start of the battle. Instead of taking part, Liam Lynch and Liam Deasy decide to go to Kingsbridge Station and get the train to Limerick to organise the IRA there. They're taken into custody by General Owen O'Duffy, who questions them as to their intentions. "You'd better be on your way south," O'Duffy said, accompanying his parting words with a handshake. It was alleged that Lynch was released by O'Duffy because he gave his word of honour that he disapproved of the policy of irregulars and would not assist them. What Lynch had actually said to O'Duffy was, "I think you're all mad." Lynch and O'Duffy had always been good friends and had worked hand in hand during the long drawn-out conferences for army reunification, so it's understood that it was through goodwill that O'Duffy allowed Lynch to go free, believing that he would help limit the civil war in the south. With the words, "I think you're all mad," the leader of the anti-treaty forces for the next 10 months of the Civil War was allowed to go free. Collins would have appreciated that. As for Owen O'Duffy letting him slip through his fingers, as me granny might say, that fellow would put your post in a pump. That's not the only stupid thing Owen O'Duffy ever did. He also founded the Blue Shirts and Fine Gael. Sure, there he is with Alfie Byrne giving the old Sieg Heil.
Heil, WT. How are you doing?
The Battle of Dublin was over, but the Civil War was starting in the rest of the country. On the 1st of July, Collins appoints himself Commander-in-Chief of the Army and appoints a War Council of 3, himself, Owen O'Duffy and Richard Mulcahy, to conduct the rest of the war. Anti-treatyites later disparagingly call this a dictatorship, and that's exactly what it is. The media are ordered to use certain words when it comes to describing the belligerents in the war. Free State is not to be mentioned, just like today. So the pro-treaty army is called the National Army. The anti-treaty side can't be called Republicans, they must be called irregulars. You know, like you haven't had your Weetabix. Collins immediately brings the National Army up to 20,000 to deal with the 13,000 irregulars. Collins wants to make all of these things look very democratic, so he writes to Arthur Griffith. "It would be well, I think, if the government issued some sort of official instruction to me nominating the War Council of 3 and appointing me to act by special order as Commander-in-Chief during the period of hostilities." This is 2 days after he already appointed himself. Collins is conducting the war the way he wants to, and this is where we see the split in the pro-treaty side, the difference of approach. In mid-July already, they're suggesting summary executions. Collins refuses. He's not going to shoot his former comrades like that. This mild-mannered cabinet may look like what Kevin O'Higgins described as the most conservative revolutionaries in history, but as Todd Andrews wrote in his brilliant Dublin Made Me, a fearful bourgeois is as savage as any wild animal. And the North is constantly on Collins' mind. Even the day the Civil War breaks out, Collins is writing to Churchill, asking him to disavow Craig's repudiation of the Boundary Commission and denounce Craig's intention of abolishing proportional representation in local elections, describing PR as an enlightened and eminently fair system. But even in late July, in the middle of the Civil War, he's still discussing the North with W.T. Cosgrave, of all people. He writes, "I'm forced to the conclusion that we might yet have to fight the British in the northeast. We must by forceful action make them understand that we will not tolerate this carelessness with the lives of our people. It is not individuals who are in charge of shooting parties or hold-up parties that are the guilty ones. The guilt lies with the high authorities, and we must face that." That's why Collins took out Henry Wilson. But even later, discussing the army with WT, he says, "We now have a force that means something in future dealings with Britain in the northeast. The present fight, civil war, is only training our troops. It gives our soldiers confidence." So even still, though everything's gone wrong, he's still thinking about the stepping stone. In early August, Collins grows the army to 35,000. He's actually using the Civil War to give himself an army, the match of the one in the north. And with the Civil War only 6 weeks old, Collins decides to go south to try and make peace with the anti-treaty side. The never give in to terrorists lobby in his cabinet can't be happy with this. But what cabinet? Collins is the boss. When he heads south on the 9th of August, a very strange announcement is made by Ernest Blythe. Blythe, acting Minister of Home Affairs, submits a memo to the cabinet of the Provisional Government, saying that there was no likelihood of a united Ireland within a reasonable period of time, and calls for a peaceful policy towards the Northern Irish Government, including nationalists taking their seats in the Northern Irish Parliament. He argues that even though his policy may fail, there was some hope, and the aggressive policy had failed totally to protect Catholics. He says all military operations on the part of our supporters in or against the Northeast should be brought to an end, and that all future pressure on Northern Ireland should be absolutely normal and constitutional. Where have I heard that before? Here we see the complete divergence between Collins' plans and the Provisional Government's plans. And this is where Collins has one of many targets on his back. The anti-treaty side don't trust him. They think he's instigated a counter-revolution against their dreams of a republic. And the British don't trust him. They know if he makes peace with the anti-treaty side and reunites the army, he's going to turn it on the North. And the Free State Cabinet don't trust him. Far from settling into the nice 26-county Catholic state they've been dreaming of, here they have a militant loose cannon, wildly popular in the country, who could end up like Joseph Tito, uniting all the disparate people on the island with the proviso: tolerate each other, or else. The Dáil may never reconvene. Collins is now a thorn in everybody's side. A book you need to read before the centenary year of 2022 is John M. Regan's Myth and the Irish State. You're going to need it by your side, and a bucket to help you through all the ridiculous claptrap you're going to hear in the centenary year of Collins' death. He writes of this period: "Only when Collins was dead did power begin to devolve to an embryonic parliamentary democracy. It is a truism of politics that sudden shifts in authority and legitimacy, more particularly in time of revolution and war, often prove to be destabilizing. If no crisis followed his death, it may well be because by 22nd of August 1922, Collins was the crisis." All three had motives to kill Michael Collins. But who actually did it? That's what we'll find out in part 2. Thank you all so much for paying for what I hope you thought of as an enlightening and original experience. This is my only income now, so I really appreciate it. But I need you to keep spreading the word. Please tell your friends about the Michael Collins Show. If they purchase tickets for it now at paddycullivan.com, they can watch it straight away, and they'll get the link to the next show, part 2, on June 25th. Of course, you'll get to watch that for free, and you'll get the link because you already have a ticket. Also, at paddycullivan.com, my other show, The Murder of Wolfe Tone, parts 1 and 2 are available to buy and view immediately. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once I hit 1,000 subscribers, they start paying you. Putting these shows together is incredibly intricate and takes hours and hours of editing on very expensive equipment. Fine Gael will be proud of me. I've upskilled. I've learned Final Cut, bought a 10TB hard drive, a green screen, and read everything about Michael Collins, so you don't have to. Please support me at Patreon and PayPal, and get in touch and let me know what you thought of the shows. On On the 22nd of August 1922, around 30 men engage in a firefight in West Cork. 29 men leave with their lives. There's only one fatality, one of the most important Irishmen that ever lived. What happened to Béal na Bláth, and why is there such a mystery around his death? A cover-up so big it makes JFK look like a walk in the park. What happened to his cap, his coat, the papers he was carrying? Where's his rifle? How come everyone who was there has a different story to tell? And barely anyone agrees on what they saw or who was there. Why was there no inquiry, no inquest, no autopsy, not even a death cert? And why did everyone who had anything to do with Collins' covert operations in the first months of 1922 end up dead? Who wanted to settle all family business? Who gained? And why is Michael Collins such a hot potato to this day? Michael Collins spent every waking hour of his life trying to free Ireland. People do a great disservice to him, trying to place him in their own political corner or dismissing him out of hand for the same reasons. I think I've shown he was more than the two-dimensional caricature we've been handed down through the ages, and that his version of stepping stone or freedom to achieve freedom wasn't some vague, far-off, kick the can down the road while I enrich myself type of approach. That wasn't his style. What happened to him was a travesty, and we owe it to ourselves to find out what happened. But most of all, we owe it to him.
Nothing ever left to chance, more than just a pair of hands. Gotta watch 'em like a hawk. Why do we always have to fight before we can talk? Now I'm the only one who knows how to make 'em walk. I got a dangerous feeling running through my veins again. A dangerous feeling running through my veins again. I love you completely, my friend, but it's never over. And I'll do it again and again and again. Now I'm back in the fold, doing just what I'm told. Wonder why I'm feeling old, getting ready to take on the world. I love you so much, how could you turn? I got a dangerous feeling running through my veins again. A dangerous feeling running through my veins again. I love you completely, my friend, but it's never over.